You know that feeling, the one that settles in your chest like a stone, the hollow, aching quiet after someone leaves or is taken. You can't sleep, you can't eat. You keep reaching for a presence that isn't there anymore. You think it's a modern problem, a side effect of smartphones, dating apps, suburbs, single-person apartments. You think your ancestors were too busy surviving to fall apart over someone. You would be wrong. For roughly 300,000 years, your brain has been running the same emotional software. The same circuits that make you feel connection are the exact same circuits that make you feel loss. Heartbreak is not a modern invention. It is one of the oldest experiences in the human story. And your ancestors felt it. Deeply. The question is, what did they do about it? In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Leese spent years living among the Jew/Huanzi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the longest surviving hunter-gatherer societies on Earth. What he found upended everything researchers thought they knew about early human emotional life. These were not grim, isolated survivors grinding through miserable days. They were deeply socially enmeshed people whose entire psychological structure was built around other humans. Their identity did not begin and end with themselves. It began and ended with the group. Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary psychologist at the University of Oxford, spent decades studying why human brains are so disproportionately large compared to other primates. His answer was not what anyone expected. You did not evolve a big brain to make tools or solve puzzles. You evolved it to manage relationships. His research, now widely known as Dunbar's number, suggests the average human can maintain stable, meaningful social bonds with roughly 150 people simultaneously, and that this cognitive ceiling has been biologically stable since at least the Pleistocene epoch, the stretch of time running from 2.6 million to roughly 11,700 years ago. In other words, your brain was not built for productivity, it was built for people. And when those people were lost, through death, exile, or separation, the impact reached into every layer of your ancestor's life in ways that had no modern equivalent. So let's reconstruct a moment. Imagine you are living roughly 50,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now sub-Saharan Africa. You belong to a band of about 30 to 50 people. You have known most of them your entire life. You sleep near them. You hunt with them. You raise children alongside them. The line between friend and family does not exist. Everyone is both. Your survival, your identity, your entire sense of self is held inside that circle of people. Now imagine that someone inside that circle is suddenly gone. There is no hospital to soften the transition, no funeral home, no paperwork, no week of bereavement leave. One moment the person is there, their voice, their smell, the specific way they laughed, and then they are not, just the place in the camp where they used to sit. The grief would have been raw and total, and the archaeological record tells you your ancestors did not simply absorb it and move on, they marked the loss. At Shanidar Cave in what is now northern Iraq, researchers uncovered a Neanderthal burial site dated to roughly 65,000 years ago. Around the skeletal remains was evidence of pollen from wildflowers. Whether deliberately placed as an offering or gathered by other means, the site ignited decades of debate. But when you look at that site alongside dozens of other intentional Neanderthal burials from the same period, bodies carefully arranged, sometimes with objects placed nearby, a picture takes shape that is impossible to dismiss. These were beings who felt the weight of death, who could not simply step over a body and keep moving. They mourned, and they made the mourning visible. But heartbreak in your ancestral world was not only about death. Hunter-gatherer bands were not stationary. They moved constantly, following game, following seasonal water sources, tracking the migrations of prey across terrain that could span hundreds of miles in a single year, and sometimes a band would split. A young man might leave with a neighboring group. A woman might move to join her partner's people far away. The person who had grown up beside you, who knew your history, who remembered the stories your grandmother told. That person might now be a 3-day walk across open savanna. In a world without writing, without any way to send a message, that distance felt absolute. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent decades living alongside the Blackpub people of the Kalahari, documenting what people actually said and did in the hours around the campfire each night. What she found was remarkable. Roughly 80% of nighttime conversation was not about logistics, not about where to hunt tomorrow or how to repair a tool. It was social. It was relational. People talked about the ones who were absent. They revisited old stories, named people who were far away, wondered aloud what they might be doing right now. They kept bonds alive through the act of speaking them into the present. This is one of the oldest grief management tools in human history, and you still use it. When you miss someone, you talk about them. You scroll through old photographs. You recount shared memories to people who knew you both. Your ancestors had none of those technologies. But they had the fire, and they had each other, and they had language, which turned out to be enough. Now here's the part that should stop you cold. Heartbreak is not a metaphor. It is a biological event. When you lose a close bond, whether through death, separation, or rejection, your brain does not categorize that as an emotional experience. It categorizes it as a physical threat. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist at Rutgers University, spent years scanning the brains of people who had just experienced romantic rejection. The regions that activated were not the brain's emotion centers. They were the pain centers, the same neural circuits that process a broken bone or a burned hand. This is not coincidence. This is ancient engineering. Your ancestors lived in a world where separation from your group was functionally a death sentence. No allies meant no food sharing, no protection, no one to watch your children while you slept, no one to warn you about the predator moving through the grass upwind. Loneliness was not a mood. It was a mortal risk. So your brain evolved to make it feel exactly like one. The ache you feel when you are isolated is not weakness. It is a survival alarm calibrated over hundreds of thousands of years. A signal so old it predates the invention of language itself. And here's the counterintuitive truth: your ancestors understood that you have largely lost. They were, in measurable ways, less lonely than you are. Not because their lives were easier. They were not. Not because they never lost anyone. They lost people constantly, to predators, to illness, to injury, to childbirth, to starvation. Loss was woven into the fabric of every single year. But they processed that loss inside a structure that modern life has quietly dismantled. James Soosman, an anthropologist who spent years embedded with the Ju Hwansi of Namibia, observed something that researchers in grief science have since confirmed through controlled studies. People heal faster from loss, measurably, neurologically faster, when they are embedded in tight, continuous, physically present social bonds, not digital communities, not weekly group chats. Continuous, daily, bodily proximity to people who know them deeply. Your ancestors had that by default. You have to build it deliberately, in a world that keeps pulling you away from it. Physical touch was also part of this. Primatologist Robin Dunbar's research on social grooming reveals that touch triggers the release of endorphins, the brain's natural painkillers, and that early humans, like other social primates, likely used touch as one of their primary tools for regulating social bonds and soothing emotional pain. When someone in the band was grieving, they were not left alone with it. They were held, literally. Your nervous system was designed to be regulated by other nervous systems, sitting close to another person, being touched by them. These are not comforts. They are medicine. The Akong San did not have a word for loneliness as a chronic condition, not because they never felt the ache of absence, but because absence was always temporary. The band was always there. The fire was always being lit again. You live differently. You might go an entire day without meaningful touch from another person. You might spend weeks without a single conversation that travels below the surface. You are surrounded by more humans than any of your ancestors ever encountered in a lifetime. Faces on screens, voices through earbuds, thousands of strangers brushing past you on city streets. And yet, statistically, you are lonelier than people who lived in caves. Not as a judgment, as a measurement. What your ancestors practiced, not as philosophy, not as conscious strategy, but as the only way they knew how to live, is something grief researchers have been trying to reconstruct and prescribe for decades. You mourn together. You name the absent person at the fire. You let the people who know you sit close to you in the dark and say nothing in particular. You let yourself be witnessed. You keep showing up at the circle. That is the oldest form of healing the human species has ever known. You know that feeling, the one that settles in your chest like a stone. Your ancestors knew it too. Every single one of them. Across 300,000 years, in caves and on savannas and in river camps and cold mountain passes, they sat with that same ache, and they turned toward each other. The stone is ancient, so is the remedy.